All right, I think we'll get started. If you'd be able to close the door in the back just so it's a bit quieter. Mike Shanley, I'm on the SID board. I'm very excited to introduce this panel. Recently on the Aid Market podcast, we had USAID's Chief Innovation Officer on there talking about AI applications at USAID, thinking about ways they can internally improve their operations with AI. And I'm also the CEO of Aid Connect and Connected, where we're busy working on a suite of AI business development services for USAID partners applying AI. So I'm very excited to hear about, speaking of sparks of hope, ways that we can use AI in a positive way to streamline the work. Our mission, I'm sure your mission, is reduce the amount of effort it takes to win USAID funding, so more of this limited funding can be applied to the field projects and not to overhead expenses. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rob Russell, Chief Revenue Officer with Grant Assistant, and I'm holding your microphone. All right. Here you go, Rob.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. I think this will be a really interesting and fascinating panel discussion, both about how AI can be used in the development proposal process, but in other processes that support the work that you do and the work that funders do. I want to reflect quickly on a couple of things that we heard this morning from Catherine and from Ambassador Green. In particular, what Ambassador Green said, and he talked about the importance of humanity in solving the problems that we face. We're going to talk about ways today that humanity and technology together, applied intelligently, help us do just that. And I also want to reflect on the point that Catherine made about the cosmic convergence of brilliance that you're about to witness. So hopefully we give you some of that. So no pressure for the panelists. We're going to go pretty quickly into our agenda. We are going to talk about AI and its application in the proposal process and some business development processes, but also some other parts of the process. I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves and spend a moment or two just talking about kind of teeing up the topic from their perspective. And then we're going to have 15 to 20 minutes of a moderated discussion with questions that I've sort of prepared in advance. We really want to hear about your questions, hear from you, and what questions you have about the topic, about how AI might help, or what you're afraid of in the context of AI. Let's have that conversation. So with that, without any further ado, let me introduce Maureen Shaukat for some introductory remarks.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen Shaukat. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at URC, which is a global health organization. But I spent most of my career at USAID. I was the Chief Acquisition Officer, and my last position was the Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator for Policy Planning and Learning. So I'm not an AI expert, but I see the utility of using it. And if you were in the last session on AI, you saw that it was a very high-level discussion about policy. We had Accenture and Google and others talking very high policy. I'm hoping in this session, we're going to be able to bring it down to a very operational level and talk about it from the user perspective. I'm glad I see a head shaking. So we hope that we'll be able to demystify some things and give you some ideas on how to use AI. AI is not new. It's not a new concept. It was actually first introduced in the 1950s. But what is new is that in the last several years, in the last 5 years in particular, we have the emergence of many new technologies in order to be able to use AI. And for some people, that seems scary. But if you think back to the way that people reacted to computers when they were first introduced, there was a lot of fear. Oh, are they going to take our jobs away from us? Will humans still be important? Well, we now know that we can't live without computers, and they're an excellent tool in our lives. Same thing with the internet. When the internet came out, oh, this is something new and different. What is it? There were very early adopters to that, and we saw how they changed the world. And now it's a part of everyone's life, and children can't imagine that there was ever a world without it. I think we're going to see the same thing from AI. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. I'm Bill Steiger. I most recently was filling Sean's very large shoes as Chief of Staff at USAID. Also worked at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and in between stints in government, been on the other side, through the George W. Bush Institute and other places working on NGO coalitions and programs in sub-Saharan Africa on global health. So I've seen the need for this technology on both sides. And what excites me a lot about this company and this technology and others like it is the promise that it provides, that it offers for allowing you as professionals and those inside donor organizations like AID to win back their time. The greatest gift this is going to give you is your time back to focus on the right things, on the real work, on the technical, substantive work. Artificial intelligence is never going to replace human intelligence. And this technology and others are not going to do what you do. They're going to allow you to do it better and smarter and quicker and faster. So two messages for you on the top. One is that I don't believe that localization is possible without this technology, that making it far easier for local small organizations to apply for donor funding is crucial. Now, that does not, in my view, obviate the need for donors like USAID and others to make their processes easier, less burdensome, more understandable. But this technology will allow organizations that maybe never had the time or the money to take a chance on applying for federal or other donor funds to do so. The second thing that excites me is the application of this technology inside donor organizations. USAID and others need to use these tools to make their own processes smarter and better and quicker for their own staff. Donor organizations will never have enough people to do everything that we ask them to do. And tools like this will allow our contracting officers, our agreement officers, the representatives of both of them, and our general program staff at all sorts of donor organizations to spend more time in the field, to spend more time with prospective organizations, to spend more time with current implementers, and not on administrative tasks that no one really wants to do, but take an enormous amount of time and energy.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, when Bill was named as Chief of Staff at USAID, I didn't know him, but my wife did, and asked if I knew him. And my wife's Catalan, and she said, you know, Bill speaks some Catalan too. So now it's a prerequisite for being Chief of Staff at USAID. You have to speak some Catalan. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for filling this room. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited about this topic. And I think that this isn't a question of should we use this or not. It's here, and how do we best corral this amazing technology and tool in different ways. And I think a lot of us are already doing it. I was at a session, a CEO retreat of international NGOs, and there was a session on AI where the leader of the session was kind of trying to talk us into AI. And I said, you know, I think we're all using this a lot more than you realize. I see it at my organization. I'm the president and CEO of Anera, American Near East Refugee Aid. I see it at my organizations. There's still a lot more we can do. We can move faster. There is fear. There's trepidation, as there is with anything new, and also just getting into the habit of it, right? There's some times where you could use it and you don't even think about it. And I think once we get into the habit of it, it's going to be pretty indispensable. And I hope we'll talk about some of the uses and how we see it. But I can just say, I mean, just even this week, there were two instances which I think show what's happened. One was that I had been being asked, please give me the scope of work for this consultant we want to hire. And I had been delayed. And I wrote down one line, this is the scope of work. And pretty quickly back, I got the whole scope of work. And I thought, wow, I wrote it to a colleague, right? I gave it to her. She wrote something back. I thought, wow, that was quick, and this is full, and this is good. And I realized, oh, she must have used AI. And I asked her, and she said, yes. And for me, that's a positive, right? That's someone because it was good. If it sounded like gibberish, or it sounded like not us, or it missed the mark, then we'd have some work on it. And she probably put some work on it. The same week, there was a concept note due. Suddenly the deadline was here, and we found out that it had been just floating around. Someone said, well, I thought you were writing. Well, I thought you were writing it. And 2 months had gone by and nobody had done this thing. So quickly something was slapped together, and the draft I saw wasn't good. And I thought, why didn't they just use AI to get going at least? And I know this morning in the plenary session, we were having a good laugh over the use of ChatGPT to talk about this. And I think two things. One, let's not laugh anymore. I always find it amazing when people laugh about technology, or they say, oh, I'm too old, or let's get the kids or the grandkids to do that. You're sort of saying you're not prepared to do this work, I think, if you do that. The other is, I'm sure we're all saying, well, yes, this is a little fantastical, it's over the top, but wow, what a good draft that I could work with, right? And make it more appropriate to the moment, to the organizations involved, to the task at hand. So I'm excited about it. Look forward to talking about it today. Thanks.
Thank you all for getting us started. Let's talk about the elephant in the room to kick us off. What's the downside? You guys painted a pretty rosy picture about what we can all do with AI, especially from a development perspective. What do you perceive as potential downsides?
Go for it. Sure, I'll start. So we're hearing, well, what if everything is homogenized? Everything sounds the same. Or what if you write what if you have the work done for you? I'm thinking right now about grant proposals, and then you can't deliver on that. Well, I think you can do that once, right? But it's the same way if you decided, well, I need some help. So you hire a really good consultant who's an excellent writer, or a great consultant who's a great program designer, or in this case, someone who can do both, as the AI tool can, and they write something that actually doesn't fit your capacity. Well, you might win the project, but you'll get to do that once. And then if you can't implement on it, then that doesn't work anymore. So there still have to be checks obviously on what the work is. But I think so often we struggle to get going. We struggle to match the concept to the writing. And for me, the biggest thing is the barrier, the barriers to entry. And I think that's what's exciting. On localization, we talk about the importance of it. We know that to do human development right, there needs to be leadership from the people who are there in front of the human development challenge, but they often can't even participate or respond because the call for proposal is just too darn complicated to even understand. And they can't begin to think about how they would respond to this, even if they're working often as a sub to one of us or as a local partner. Participating in that is just too high a barrier. So I'm talking about the positive, but I think that's a huge asset with this. I give everyone permission to take your jackets off.
Yes, it's very warm in here. I think also it can be a little intimidating for people, because when you first start using it, the information you get out is only as good as the queries that you put into it. And so then do you get something and it's not quite what you wanted, and so then you stop. But the more familiar you get with it and the better you can tailor your queries, the better the information is. And so I think it's getting over that learning curve, and not stopping right away when you don't get quite the result that you want, but to keep using it and keep getting familiar with it to overcome those barriers.
Yeah. I think one other elephant in the room is volume, right? If it's easier to apply, there are going to be more applications. We all have to accept that. Is that necessarily negative? Maybe not, right? If you look at an analogous, potentially life-changing tool, like those of you who have kids in college or about to go to college, the Common Application, that has clearly made it a lot easier to apply for college. It hasn't necessarily made it easier to get in, and it certainly hasn't diluted the pool. In fact, probably made college a lot more diverse in numerical terms than it has been before. Something like that, I think, is going to happen with this technology and development. Yes, there will be more proposals written. I think there will be more good proposals written. It will be harder for USAID and other funders actually to make decisions, because this technology is going to allow better ideas to surface, because it will allow organizations to much more clearly express themselves, to be responsive to solicitations, and to much more coherently and clearly indicate what they want to do and why they have the right capability to do whatever that is. So my answer is yes, volume will go up. I think quality will go up, and the donors will have to respond to that, in part by using technology themselves to sort, to filter, and to make their own processes simpler and easier and quicker because so many better ideas are going to come out of this that perhaps have never been put forward before.
So let me pull on that thread a little bit, as Maureen used to be in charge of procurement for USAID and has probably an interesting perspective on that point. We were talking to a contracting officer recently who told us, I get 12 responses. 3 of them are really good. They're A's. There's some B's and some C's, and those are easy to differentiate. What I worry about in the age of AI, when the world that Bill and Sean just talked about becomes real, I'm going to get 24 proposals and they're all A's. So does that scare you from someone who sat in that seat from a procurement perspective? Or how do you think about that?
I think it's great. Because if you think about it, we're all in this room because we're passionate about international development. We want all A proposals and to be able to make a really tough decision on the very best that's out there. So I see it as a really good thing for development. Yes, for the contracting officers and for the technical panels, yes, it's more work, but they could also use AI for that. I know there's a lot of parts of DoD that are using AI to already design RFPs. And in fact, NATO is using AI to evaluate proposals because they found that they heard a complaint that there were biases in selecting contractors of a particular nation. So they're using AI to kind of level that playing field to see, is there really a bias? Because in this case, I know when we talk about AI, we talk about biases a lot, but in this case, they were using AI to try to prevent a bias from occurring. So I thought that was very interesting. And then at the end of the day, the contracting officer has to make a decision. And I would much rather, when I was a contracting officer, make a really tough decision about 2 really fantastic proposals and which one was going to be the winner than looking at one and just saying, well, I guess this is the best we're going to get. So I think it's the human element in there. Our contracting officers will have to step up and make those tough decisions, but I think they're well equipped to do that.
Thank you. Talking about other elements on the donor side, on the funder side, and Bill, this is something we talked about in advance of the panel. I know you've got some thoughts about how, not just from a proposal and development perspective, but from a post-award perspective, AI can be used to make our processes more efficient.
Sure, and I know Maureen has thoughts on this too. I'm convinced that USAID and other agencies like it and private donors, they have to start adapting this technology. I alluded to this at the beginning. There will just never be enough funding to hire the number of people to do procurement work at aid or most other institutions in the way that our leadership is expecting the organization to function, right? To get to the current administrator's goal of even 25% localization, which is not happening very swiftly, you would have to hire thousands more people to do it the traditional way. This technology will allow for innovation, and it's long past time for USAID to innovate and other donors their own internal processes for how they publish, they create, publish, manage solicitations, and then the awards that come after them. And to my mind, as I said, this is going to return a really valuable commodity to the technical people at USAID to allow them to get back in the business of managing awards and managing relationships with beneficiaries and with partners, which, because of a very paper-heavy process that exists today on all aspects of work at USAID, and this is true for most donors, they just don't have time to focus on that work a lot of the time. So this is a really powerful way, I think, both to democratize, to diversify the applicant pool and ultimately the implementer pool for a major donor like USAID, but also to make the entire process of giving away and managing money much more efficient and to reduce a lot of the nonsense that happens to take up people's time.
So it's interesting. I mentor a number of contracting officers as a part of the USAID Alumni Association. And I was talking to a CO recently, and she was feeling a little demoralized and overworked. And I said, how long has it been since you were out to the field to see your programs? And she sighed and she said, oh, I wish. And I said, no, you're at that point. You need to put all the paper down and you need to get out to the field. That's what they need to be doing. They need to see the programs. They need to understand what you're doing. And as a CO, that was my favorite part of the job. But most of them feel so bogged down with the work. As Bill said, you're never going to have enough contracting officers in USAID. There's never going to be enough resources to hire the number that they need. And so what AI helps with is it gets rid of the mundane things that are really tying our contracting officers up, and it can create the space for creativity. I'll give you one example. NEG memos. You would not believe how long they take, but you have to do those before you can make an award, because if you haven't signed it before you make an award, it's like it didn't exist when it comes time for a protest. They take a tremendous amount of time. Well, AI can really help by taking the technical evaluation panel's notes and helping to write that NEG memo, reducing your time to hours rather than weeks. That's one example of many that I can think of that would really reduce the burden on our workforce at USAID.
So one of the consistent themes across the cross-cutting topics we've talked about is time. And so, Sean, I wonder if you could spend a little bit of time, that was totally unintentional, sorry, talking about what time means from in the context of localization for those local organizations. How does AI translate to time, translate to better outcomes for them?
Well, I think the first thing, I mean, really, we have to be honest and recognize that there are so many organizations that we know about and we don't even know about that just aren't even entering at all. Again, either on their own or with us. And so that will actually mean they're spending more time on it, but much less than they fear. And if they don't have tools to help them. All of this is faster. What I'm seeing is just every step is faster. Some of the steps are significantly faster, and others you still have to spend a lot of human time on. But overall, there's a pretty significant savings of time. And I think the other thing, back on a previous question, is we're a little worried that there'll be homogenization and every proposal will be good. But I think we should also be honest and recognize sometimes projects get funded that aren't the best, and there are pieces that are missing. So even if you've got time to put together a good proposal and win, maybe you didn't look at everything in the development experience clearinghouse. Maybe you didn't look at all of the research. And so having all of that, and of course, the smaller your staff, the smaller your resources, the smaller extent of your experience in writing proposals means you've got now access to this that you wouldn't have otherwise. So I think we'll see all of the proposals going up, and some of the evaluators will say, wow, now I'm really seeing something that captures everything important for this issue, for this sector, for this country context. They brought in that research that we know is so critical to addressing this development challenge. So I think we'll see an increase in the quality in thought, in design, in writing, and at the same time, a reduction in the amount of time it takes you to get there. And that's a big deal.
Okay. I've got a couple more questions, but I'm going to ask one and then sort of start opening it up to the room. I see some head nods. I see some interest in questions here. So we've got a microphone there if you want to come up, or I don't know if from the organizing perspective, there's someone that can bring those microphones out. But so let me ask this sort of next question. This is to Maureen, thinking about the post-award, the reporting, the things that happen after an award and after a program's been implemented. Do you see a role for AI in supporting some of those functions?
Absolutely, because award administration takes a lot of time. And what USAID is always looking for is good stories. You all have great stories in all of your reports that you send in, whether they're, I hope they're not monthly, but if they're quarterly or semi-annually, remember those? But then how do you take those stories that are in the work plans and bring them up to a level? That's a lot of work that the mission doesn't usually have time to do. So all the great work that you're doing at times sits there on a shelf. That shouldn't be. I think AI can really help with telling the story and collating information about results that are actually being achieved in a much easier way. I think it can really help with the portfolio reviews that they do to make sure that all the programs are on track. And I think it can really also help in, again, bringing all that information together and helping missions with making really strategic decisions. Because the real beauty of AI is getting all the rest of that out of the way so people have time to be thinking creatively and thinking very strategically. And so I think there's a lot of application for that, both within the program offices, as well as the technical offices and the contracting office and the front office.
I'll say one thing to add to that. I recommend highly a report published by the Office of the Inspector General at USAID in 2018, which is still relevant today, on award management. And it faulted the agency for a number of serious lapses in the systems that it has in place to manage awards after a solicitation goes out and after a contract or award is signed. Not because people are intentionally abusing the system, but most of the reasons that people weren't doing site visits, that people weren't interacting with implementers, that people weren't following up and making sure that MEL plans were in place or awards or reports were being filed on time, had to do with lack of bandwidth. Almost all of those challenges that the Inspector General identified had to do with USAID staff in the field not having the time to do the things that they really should be doing. This kind of technology offers them that opportunity. The other thing that Maureen and I used to talk about when we were both at the agency was the difficulty in translating learning across an organization as diverse and as global as USAID. And this is true of many donor organizations, true of many implementing organizations. USAID has helped fund a solution to every problem somewhere once. And very rarely does that solution get translated in a systematic and comprehensive way to other relevant situations to solve the same problem. Maybe with some adaptation, but basically without a lot of change, because people don't know about it. Even within the agency, despite all of the things published in the deck, despite all of the things published on the web or in academic literature, most people don't have the time to sit down and sift through all of that to be able to figure out what the science is saying or what best practice is saying about the best way to address a particular issue in a context that might be transferable to others. This kind of tool that Grant Assistant has developed and others will allow for that, right? It will allow for you to feed in all sorts of literature, publicly available and not, from your organization, from USAID, from other donors, and provide a synthesis of that in an amazingly short amount of time that will allow for much better development of an idea. It's not going to tell you what to do, but it's going to provide incredible recommendations that maybe you might have missed because you and your team just didn't have the time to sift through everything that's out there. And so I think for an organization like AID, it really has the promise of offers the opportunity to deliver on the promise that AID tells itself and makes to you all, that it's the best in the world and that it's got solutions to lots of things, because it does. But unfortunately, not enough of the time are those solutions applicable or applied in a larger context at scale.
Yeah, I think this point you made about USAID, and you mentioned that it's true for implementers as well. If we spend all of our time just trying to gather the info that we have of our own and then don't have time to look beyond that, and maybe don't even get the first part right, we forget something we did somewhere because it was a long time ago and all the staff are new and our filing system isn't clear enough. So being able to have that and then be able to quickly go beyond that to the research, to the experience of others is important.
So that's a good segue, I think, to into your questions and your thoughts. The first hand I saw a while ago, though, was in the green in the back. Do you still have a question? Yes. Oh. No more. Okay. Sorry. Questions.
We can
right here in the front.
Another one if you want. Do you want to take a second one here too? Because we can use this.
Okay. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is Patrick. Next year. The first question is on pricing. Wouldn't that be an issue? How would you price this tool to ensure that some of the local firms are able to afford it and provide that level playing field? Second question is, if AI really works on large language models, I suspect the tool is going to pull in some of the proposals that have been successful in the past, and that's what it's trained on. Wouldn't that be at a disadvantage to the bigger firms and their proprietary knowledge, whilst also trying to level the playing field for the smaller firms that are looking to get in the space?
So good question. I'm not going to speak specifically about our tool and our product. This isn't intended to be a commercial, although I would love it to be one. And I'm happy to talk to you after the conversation. So let me say, with respect to the second question, I'm certainly happy to talk about pricing. One of our ambitions is to make sure that we are creating access points for organizations of all sizes. With respect to the second question, as I was evaluating, if I was looking into AI tools, I would want to look at organizations who were keeping my organization's information segmented, so it wasn't helping other organizations or learning from using my capability to learn to support others. But I can certainly, I'm very happy to talk in more detail after the panel to answer some of your more specific questions. Yep, right behind you.
Let me just add, Rob, there's not going to be one tool, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
There are already several, and there will be many more. So I think there'll be pressure to keep the pricing so that it works for every organization that wants it. Otherwise, somebody else will fill that, right?
Yeah, I also think that AI is the great equalizer, right? So USAID has a new partner initiative as well as localization. It's really hard to break into the USAID market if you don't know how to do it. So this isn't going to guarantee you a win, but it's going to help you get over that learning curve very, very quickly. And so I see it more as an equalizer, if nothing else. And competition is a good thing.
Right behind Patrick.
My name is Ike Yoke, Michigan State University. I'm sorry to take you back to, or the entire panel, back to the question that you asked earlier about the elephant in the room. I don't think that question was actually answered. What is it can we be worried about? There's no question that AI is here to stay, and we are all ready to, dance to the tune. But just prepare our mind as to what we can expect that we cannot see right now. Thank you.
So I'm also the ethics and compliance officer at URC. And I can tell you that there's a whole new industry that's emerging right now dealing with all the risk associated with AI. There's a lot of risk there in terms of, especially in the international environment, in terms of protecting people's privacy. There's just all kinds of things. Bias, as we've mentioned, false narratives that sometimes will emerge. There's really a whole industry that's now coming out. I guess this is a signal for us.
They're trying to cool us down, Maureen.
It's your boss, Maureen. He's leaning against the.
Oh, but I think it's important. Something we haven't been talking about too much yet, but it's really important to remember is that we are not giving up our responsibility for the proposals we're putting in, or for the work that we're doing, or the decisions a contracting officer is making. No one is giving up that responsibility. That responsibility still exists with humans. And so if you remember that, then you're reducing the risk quite a bit. If you forget and you just let the system take it over, it will do that for you. But then that's the biggest risk, I think, because I certainly wouldn't want to be putting my name on a proposal that I knew didn't represent our own individual design, and that we were really driving the approach that was being generated out of the AI.
Bias is also a risk, and I'm not enough of an expert, and I don't know the level of impact that we can have. But to me, it seems exciting that people in this room who are working on inclusion and human development and equality and rights are using AI more, because AI does learn from human interaction, that we can reduce some of that bias. I would like to think. I'm not enough expert to know exactly how fast that happens or how it happens, but it's something that for me seems exciting.
They're in the blue suit.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Matthew Crichton. I work for Deloitte, serving USAID in Ukraine. I have a question for the group about emotional barriers, or maybe the professional stigma around the use of generative AI around these tools. You know, Sean, you mentioned some of the opening comments kind of poked fun at, like, did you use Gen AI to write your remarks? No, I didn't. And the team that I work with, we try to do capacity building for Ukrainian healthcare facilities so that they can apply for and win grants to rebuild, to expand their services. And when we surveyed them about the use of this tool, I found it really interesting that a number of comments came back asking, isn't that cheating? Won't we get in trouble? Are we really going to get credit for the work? If you know that we're using these tools, doesn't that somehow lower us in the standings? And then I asked my counterpart, Valeria, who works with me in Ukraine to design a lot of these trainings and deliver them in Ukrainian. And I asked her if she was using it. She was like, yeah, but I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want you to think less of me as a partner. So I think there's this emotional, or there's the stigma around the use of it. And how do you all as leaders signal to your teams, or how can we signal to our local partners that this is a tool to be used to level the playing field, not to, you know, stigmatize anybody?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think we have to lead by example and by reinforcement, and by asking someone and then saying, oh, that's great, fantastic, that does it. We had an interesting thing happen where when we first started talking about this, trying to get staff to try out ChatGPT 15, 16 months ago when the new version came out, I found out, nobody told me directly, but I found out that some of the junior staff thought it was unfair because the senior staff wouldn't have to work as hard. I thought that was really funny and interesting. But if we reinforce that it's okay if they use AI to do their work better, you know, they still have to work on it. If they submitted what was read out this morning, you'd say, hey, you need to do some work on this, right? I think that's the key.
And I would also say that they really shouldn't be afraid, because it's going to make them more productive. Right. I was I was going to be doing some leadership training, and I had to put together a PowerPoint, and I was thinking, how on earth do I schedule time in my day to think about putting a PowerPoint presentation together? And I was talking to Earl, who's very adept at using AI, and he said, aren't you using AI? And I said, yes, I am. And it put together something for me in an hour, got me going, right? I still changed it, but instead of it taking me 20 hours to do everything I needed to do, it took me probably 3. And once I finished all my slides, I said, okay, now give me talking points for each one of these slides. And so it made me more productive, and then I could go on to something else. So I think people shouldn't be afraid. They should be really embracing it, because those that aren't embracing it are going to look less productive than those that are.
And I'll just say this as a consumer, as a former senior leader at a development agency. We have to be honest with ourselves that we are not an industry known for great writing. And so if this is a tool that's going to help us write better, yeah, she does. She writes well. That's correct. And she writes her own stuff, but that's rare. If you can use this to write better, what's going to happen? One, you're going to be more productive, but also your audience, whatever your audience is, whether it's your bosses or your customers or the public, is going to respond and consume your information much more readily. If you get a coherent product out of this tool, whether that's an application or that's a report, it's going to increase the chances that you're going to be able to tell your story, to your point, much better than before. That should be a huge motivator for people.
I saw a question here in the. That's twice. I keep up front. And sir, I'm coming to you next.
Hi, I'm an editor, and I can attest that some of you are great writers. But I have a question about, in your experience when you're using AI, Have you run into any concerns about it pulling in factual inaccuracies? And, does that cancel out the time savings or, can you speak to that?
This is a great question. Maureen touched on this earlier. Any technology where inputs and outputs are part of the process, the output's only as good as the input, right? And so there are sort of general purpose AI. What it's designed to do is give you an answer, and even if it doesn't know the answer, let's take ChatGPT, right? We've all played with that, or many of us have played with that, and we've gotten probably some weird results because it's designed to give you an answer, even if that answer doesn't make any sense, even if that answer is wrong. Good AI for any purpose, whether that's proposal writing or other kinds of writing, is trained and understands the context in which it's operating. So the better the context understanding of the tool you're using, the better your outputs are going to be. Now, in no sense should you be using an AI tool and not putting human eyes on it after you've written it or after you've gotten output from it. But in general, the better the context setting, the better the world setting, the better, the less likely the hallucination, the made up answers. Does that make sense?
Also, the tools can give you the sources, right? So then if you trust the source, then you've got some reassurance.
Right here. Yep. And I'm coming to you in the back next.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm David Colvin with IBI. Getting back to the risks, we alluded to the increase in volume that we can expect in terms of numbers of proposals flooding into USAID and other donor organizations. And my concern is that USAID is not going to be as fast in uptaking the use of AI as we are. And that procurement times are going to slow down because reading 12 proposals, scoring 12 proposals is a lot quicker than scoring 25 or more. So does anybody in the room know how USAID is adopting the technology? Are they looking at using the technology to evaluate proposals? Are they using it to increase their productivity? Because otherwise, I think we're going to get a real slowdown, at least in the short term.
So OAA is doing some work on this and looking at AI and how it can increase its productivity. I don't think they're getting to the point yet of evaluating proposals in that way. I think there's still some risk with that, but I think there is, Jamie is part of a coalition of senior procurement executives that are all talking together, and that includes those that are using it. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned from other organizations. Are they moving as fast as some of us will be in putting proposals in that way? Probably not. But just because you can use an AI tool to put in a proposal doesn't mean that you don't have to still do informed capture and all of that. So I don't think we're going to see a sweep of hundreds of proposals coming in because it's still going to be expensive to do a proposal and to do it right. But I do think, particularly for the new companies coming in, I was talking to some DoD small business contractors, and they were complaining about how difficult it is to break into USAID. And I thought, well, if you've had so much experience with DoD and you're finding it hard in USAID, imagine what it's like for a local organization. So I think it's for those that are investing in working with USAID, it helps smooth out some of those challenges for them. But I don't think we're going to see a whole slew of new entries that wouldn't otherwise be interested in development. And if they do submit proposals, they're going to result in those C's and D's that we were talking about. They'll be easy to weed out.
I would also say this is not just a USAID problem or challenge. Same is true across federal government, state government, commercial procurement. And I think what we will see is the market look to identify solutions that make it easier for evaluators to evaluate more proposals. So I think that's, and that may not be tomorrow, but I think that will be a market trend we would see. So we're gonna ask one more question in the audience, you and the woman in the back. And while before you answer your question or ask your question, I'll ask the panelists to be thinking about sort of crystal balling 10 years out. What does this world look like when AI is in wide adoption? And we'll close our session that way. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. I actually want to sort of piggyback on the the question and the comment, because one of the things that I'm noting is that we're talking about sort of this as a tactic, but I worry that AI is obfuscating sort of these systems issues where we're talking about creating better equity. But to Dr. Steiger's point, you pointed out that the Common College application was something that leveled the playing field. That's not AI. That's a systems issue where we created an easier way to apply rather than trying to make it easier to navigate a pretty arcane process. So I'm wondering if you see that for me, as you all are talking, that maybe having more space in the Office of Acquisitions, that you all will be able to think about some of those higher level policy issues with the time that you have freed up from having to do all the paperwork. Thanks.
So I think there's definitely going to be a more of an emergence of AI ecosystems that are helping to inform strategy and such. And Bill talked about learning. USAID is really interested in continuous learning and assessment. It's in every single solicitation that ever comes out, right? But what is that system for that? And I know they've been working for an awful long time on a system for monitoring and evaluation and capturing all the information from every single program. That's been years in the making, and I think they're back to the drawing board on that. AI can help with that because it can, in the absence of a system, it can still provide the information if you're using the tools correctly.
I'll say this, I will repeat what I said at the beginning, which is this tool or any tool like it does not absolve a donor like USAID or any other major donor of the responsibility to improve those systems, to make it easier, to make it simpler, to make it faster, to do business with the organization. And these tools, like I said, like we've all said, also can help organizations like AID do that. So it is not merely that we want to make it easier, as we do, for people to apply in the current world and the current systems that USAID and other donors use. We also want those organizations to change the way that they operate those systems, to use these technologies as they should quickly. And sometimes aid is responsive to customer input. I hope you are all telling USAID to use this technology in some way to make it easier, simpler, faster. So you're right. The systems also have to change at the same time that this tool can make it easier on the front end. The agency and other donors need to make it far easier to do business with them by using these tools on the back end too.
Thank you, Bill. So we will as a panel stay for a few moments or a few minutes after the session. If anybody would like to, has further questions, I greatly appreciate your interest in the topic and we didn't lose very many people in a hot room. So I think we did all right. So I will ask each of the panelists to give their sort of closing thoughts on what does the world look like, 5-10 years out, if intelligently applied AI takes hold in this world. Let's start. We'll go Bill, Maureen, and then give Sean the final word.
So my dream with this technology is that if 5 or 10 years from now, you're not looking at 5% of implementers of USAID and major donor programs being local, you're looking at 75%. I believe deeply this technology can help that transition, both on the implementer side and on the donor side. So I think you're going to see a world in which smartly, with guidelines on ethics, on conflict of interest, right, on responsibility, that you have both donors, especially those, or partners, especially those whose first language is not English, applying much more often for a lot smaller and more targeted, more flexible and innovative instruments and opportunities. And on the other side, that an agency like USAID and other donors have gained the bandwidth by virtue of using this technology to be able to go from the default of very large contracts and grants to a very small number of implementers to a far more diverse and far more local ecosystem of organizations that are doing the work. And that all of that world is learning from each other in a way that's systematic, that's evidence-based, and that's replicable.
So keeping with that theme, I think AI will be used in development much more to capture the local voices that we're all seeking to hear from. Working in communities, how do you really help have them keep their voice through the implementation of a program? And I think AI can help with that. Keeping with the localization, we talked a lot about getting the award and how AI can help with that. The really hard part and what I worry about with localization is what happens after they get awards, because there's nothing worse. Everyone in this room knows that you're doing good work and then you get hit with a bill for collection. Big organizations can pay that and can ride it out. It could kill a local organization. So that's something that I really worry about a lot, is what happens during administration. And I think that that's what we'll see in the next iteration of using AI tools will be to really help organizations in the administration and compliance of awards, as well as capturing the great work that they are doing.
So Cristobal, I think 10 years, maybe 5 years, maybe even 2 years from now, we'll be saying, remember when we used to do these proposals without AI? I really think, and I think also there'll be organizations who say, remember when we couldn't even respond to these because we couldn't even understand the RFA and we couldn't figure out how to begin a draft. I think a test for us will be if and when we see some homogeneity and everything's risen up, but it all is the same, it will test the system whether we really believe in and are committed to localization, right? If all things are equal and the big veteran players are winning and the local new organizations aren't winning, then we won't have been true to our word. And I think that's going to be a very important indicator of whether this tool really helps to bring about localization and locally led development work.
Please join me in thanking the panel. And thank you all for your time and interest, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you all. Thanks. That's good.